We are back for another Battletech Alpha Strike Tactica video. In this Tactica video, we're going to talk about target prioritization, the order in which you activate your shooters, and how to concentrate fire and the importance of concentrating fire. Now, I decided to do this video because all too often I see people engage targets that either they don't want to engage, but more often that they don't need to engage. And being able to prioritize your targets in a game is very, very important. If you can properly do this, you can degrade your opponent's force more effectively and give yourself a better chance of winning. And picking targets that have a significant impact on the game and identifying those targets is super, super important. Every game you play, this is going to change. Turn to turn, this could change. This could change based off of your army, your opponent's army, the mission, and the terrain can all affect how to prioritize and pick proper targets to eliminate from the game or to degrade and damage and start working on, right? And the ability to, in real time, think on your toes about which targets need to be dealt with and taken care of and prioritizing those targets in the most efficient way or the best way so that you're eliminating the biggest threats to your chances of winning in that right order is really, really important. And even if you can't do it perfectly, like the better you get at this and the more you actively think about prioritizing targets, right? And how you think about how you activate your shooters and how you think about how you'll concentrate fire, the more successful you're going to be in completing those missions because you're going to give your force the best possible chance to achieving the objectives while degrading your opponent's force to where they have less and less of a chance of being able to score the points and win the game. So some of the things that you need to consider when prioritizing a target. And I think this first one is, in my book, one of the most important priority targets, and that's scoring units. Which of your opponent's units are the ones that are going to score the points for them and score the points most efficiently and most effectively? This is especially true in missions that require speed, like capture the flag, overrun, hold the line, right? Those units that have speed in those games, even in bunkers, right? If you have fast moving transports in bunkers with infantry, you know that those strike teams can just blow your bunkers up. If you can properly prioritize taking out those targets, you are going to make it extremely difficult for your opponent to be able to score because you're going to limit their mobility, right? But in other games, right, like say like a headhunter, right? Or even in domination where speed is important, but it is not the most important thing, right? Or in headhunter, right? Headhunter and domination, like these are different missions, right? And so like in Headhunter, like prioritizing killing and eliminating the XO and the CO. Domination, you have guys that are going to be moving into the center board that aren't as fast, but also fast guys who might be able to strike out at you, right? Eliminating these targets and doing them in that order can degrade your opponent to a point where they're not actually able to score. And by preventing your opponent from scoring, you prevent them from winning. And then you're setting yourself up for more success, right? The next thing that I like to look at and consider when I'm trying to prioritize targets is evaluating which of my opponent's units are threatening my scorers, right? And this can be a little more deep because sometimes you have to hide or eliminate an opponent before you can move out. If you're in a position where you've moved and they're already getting shots on you, trying to eliminate that unit might be too late, right? Eliminating your opponent's units, it's threatening your units that are trying to score. But if you can look a turn or two ahead and say, I am currently here in my side of the board and I want to be over there where that objective is, and eliminating a unit that's covering or guarding that objective or who will be a potential threat to my objective grabber, and deciding I'm going to eliminate them so it opens up a lane for my runners, my scorers to score. That's another worthwhile consideration. So first we're going to look at how does my opponent going to score? And next is how am I going to score? And you want to use your shooting in such a way to stop them from scoring and to assist you in scoring. The next thing I like to consider is units that deal a significant amount of damage or heavy hitters eliminating them from the board. And this can be especially true to units that are vulnerable. And what do I mean by that? I'm talking about units that have a large amount of damage output, right? But maybe because they've been previously damaged or because of the unit's own intrinsic characteristics, I'm talking about their HP and how much they have, are vulnerable from being eliminated very quickly. And this is especially true for snipers and indirect fire. Oftentimes when you're talking about your LRM carriers, your heavy LRM carriers, your Shreks, your Partisans, even a lot of some of the long-range sniper mechs, they don't have a ton of hit points, or it's a combination of not a lot of hit points and a low TMM, and you can relatively quickly eliminate them from the game. And let's say that unit dishes 4, 5, 6 points of damage at medium range, or as a sniper or indirect fire, they're doing 3, 4, 5 damage at long range, right? Or indirectly, and you eliminate them from the game. You can, in one fell swoop, in a turn, eliminate 15, 20, 25% of your opponent's damage output. And that, the sooner you do that, the more effect it has on the game. So if you're in turn 2 and you take out your opponent's big heavy hitter because they've been degraded or they don't have a lot of hit points, you're losing those hit points very quickly. This is why I don't particularly care for skirmishers that have 8 or fewer hit points, because oftentimes they're bringing 3, 4, 5 points of damage to the battlefield for only a TMM2, though. And if they only have 8 points of damage or 7 points of damage or 6 points of damage, you can eliminate them very, very quickly. And then suddenly, let's say you're bringing that trebuchet that has 8 hit points and does 4 at medium, right? You eliminate him from the battlefield, and if you're only dishing 20, 22, 23 points of damage, you're taking a huge chunk out of you're losing a huge chunk of your force, right? So that's one of the reasons I don't like those. But if you can deal a significant amount of damage and eliminate those heavy hitters and concentrate your fire on them and remove them from the board earlier on, you're degrading your opponent's ability to put shots downrange, right? Any way you can quickly reduce your opponent's firepower is always going to be a good idea, right? Like if you're like, I don't have a target that's threatening my ability. I don't have someone who's threatening my runners. I don't really have a target that is really pushing or is going to be a threat to the objective. Prioritizing eliminating units from the game that are bringing damage, right? Or even just, maybe you don't want to chew through that Atlas that's got 18 points, but your opponent's got, a mech that does 3 or 4 damage that has relatively low hit points or a reasonable amount of hit points that you can chew through, and getting them off the board. You are clearing them off the board. Units that already have damage, like, think of it this way: like, if you have a unit who's got 4 shots at medium range, maybe I'm running that Victor, right? And he's got 4 shots at medium range, and in a single turn, my opponent takes out 11 of the 12 hit points and he's only got 1 left, right? You need to prioritize in the next turn getting that thing off the board, because whether he has 1 hit point or 12 hit points, he's still throwing 4 shots unless he's taking crits. He's still doing the same amount of damage. You need to get him off the board. You need to clear those things off, those damage mechs off the board, and make sure you're eliminating them, because you're going to reduce your opponent's overall effectiveness. So those weak units, those wounded units, especially ones with high damage output, if they're weak or wounded, are a great unit to prioritize clearing off the board. If a unit that deals 4 or more medium survives, like I said, like, who cares? Like, the next turn, they're still shooting. They're still shooting 4 or 5 shots, and you're leaving them on the board for only 2 hit points. You got to try to clear those off. If you're going down the line of your units and you're trying to pick, this commando that shoots 3, it can shoot target A or target B, and target B is degraded, right? And he's close to death. You want to eliminate the shots from the game before you go on. If another good target to prioritize is anytime something with high TMM closes or gets within short range, whether they've closed with you or you've closed with them, you have to take advantage of the fact that they've moved into your short range bubble, right? Because if you're skill 4 and their TMM is 3, that's the best, and they don't have cover, that's the best shot you're ever going to get at 7s. And oftentimes those things are hovercraft, so their motive is also taken into account. And most of those things that have high TMM have low HP. You have to take advantage of that and think about prioritizing those speed units, especially because Speed in Alpha Strike is such a dominant characteristic to securing objectives. Now, the weakness to speed is low HP. They're very defensive, they're hard to hit, but when you hit, they tend to go away very quickly. So if something moves within that close range, you got a skirmisher or a skimmer that's running around who can just jump on an objective very quickly, or who potentially could crash into one of your mechs and cause a bunch of damage, and you have an opportunity to shoot it at close range, you want to take it and try to clear it off the board. It's a good target to try to eliminate from the game while they've either gone in for their own kill or they've made a mistake, right? A lot of times them skimmers and them hovercraft, they want to be in your rear arc, but you see a lot of people misplay them. And if they leave themselves open to being attacked at short range, you want to consider prioritizing that target and eliminating them, especially if you consider them an objective grabber or if they have a decent damage output at short range. If they're dishing 3, like some of those Maxims that are out there, some of those Condors that are out there, some of those Drillsons that are out there, they're a good unit to prioritize in destroying. And again, I cannot reiterate, eliminating units that are close to being destroyed is almost always a good option instead of spreading out or starting down on another target. Activating your shooters. I see people make mistakes when it comes to activating their shooters all the time. They'll just start on the left side of the board and work their way to the right, or start on the right side of the board and activate their units to shoot from the left. There is a sub game that is played in the shooting phase that involves picking your units to activate in the right order so you can ensure that you are throwing the most number of shots possible. And what this means is the first units you activate are the units that can see the fewest number of targets. Specifically, if a unit can only see one target and only can shoot one target, you roll their dice first every single time. And the reason you do that is because now when you move on to your units that can target multiple targets, right? You know whether that unit's been destroyed yet or not, or if it's close to being destroyed, and you can make a better decision about how to prioritize that second unit's targets, right? So let's say I've got an Austral and he's set up behind a hill, a double hill, and all he can see is my opponent's Mad Cat. But I've got a Crusader on another part of the board that can see that Mad Cat and can also see another unit. Let's say it's a Vapor Eagle, right? You're gonna activate your unit that can just see the Mad Cat and fire first. Because if your other unit destroys that Mad Cat, you've lost whatever offensive output that unit that can only see the one target. You've lost his offensive output for the turn. If you can shoot that Mad Cat and destroy him or degrade him, and then you have other units that can see the Mad Cat and others, it'll help you make better decisions about where to shoot, and you're maximizing your damage output. So always activate this first, because it can really boost how much damage you're actually able to throw in a turn. If you have 2 or 3 units that can only see one unit, and then you eliminate some of those units, their shots are wasted, right? The other thing to think about is using indirect fire and sniper units to mop up. Now, sometimes I'll front load those, right? And I want to shoot them first because of how the priority works and how I want to degrade units or get units off the board. It's like I want my Crusader to shoot at this other unit, but I also have this Mad Cat over here. Well, maybe I can drop my indirect fire on the Mad Cat, get rid of it, and then the Crusader's decision is made a lot easier and he can shoot the other unit, right? But oftentimes I will wait and use my indirect fire and my sniper units last, because an indirect fire unit can see anything that your army can see. And a sniper is often on a hill or in a nest and can see a broad section of the battlefield. And then I use them to mop up things that were damaged but not finished off, if that makes sense. So you put a bunch of fire into that Mad Cat, he's got 1 left, you then drop your indirect fire on it and kill it. Or you do a bunch of damage, he's got 2 left, you then take your Shrek PPC carrier with that stationary, that's scaled down, and you finish it off, right? And sometimes you want to wait because you might have 2 or 3 potential targets that those units can see, and you want to see which one was most degraded over the course of the turn. And not all your units are going to be able to see those 3 targets, but because of where you're positioned as a sniper or because you have IF, you are able to see those targets. Now, note on the IF is just always, always, always make sure that any unit that you potentially have that could spot takes the penalty for spotting into account, because if you shoot with, say, a spotter mech or a potential spotter mech before the IF shoots and you don't take that penalty into account, you're not going to be able to use their eyes to call on the target. Concentrating fire. I see a lot, and a lot of people are getting better at this, but I see a lot of people spread their fire out. They just shoot the closest thing or the thing that's across from their unit. You want to concentrate fire and work on eliminating and degrading units, right? You want to degrade them down and you want to eliminate them from the game. If you are going to commit to putting shots into an Atlas, you better commit to putting a lot of shots into that Atlas. But even if you have something that's a size 12 or a size 10, try to degrade it as much as you can and try to eliminate it, right? As opposed to spreading shots out. Concentrating fire and removing units from the game is always a better option. If you let that hovercraft, if you're gonna shoot at that hovercraft, but you're not going to be able to eliminate it, it might not be the best shot, right? Or if you're going to shoot at a mech, but you're not going to eliminate it, it might not be the best shot. Allow him to be in the game the next turn. Now, I'm not saying that you should never spread your shots out. Sometimes you're not able to because of terrain or because of placement of units or because of ranges, and you have to make decisions based on ranges and probabilities. But oftentimes focusing on a unit with multiple units to eliminate them is always a better option. And this comes into play with how you move, play terrain, and move in. Anytime you can be in a position where your opponent can see fewer of your units than you can see of theirs, right? Or not even few units. Really, what it is they have let fewer of their units can actually shoot than yours can shoot. Maybe they've got a grasshopper in the middle of the board, and you've set up to where you have a hovercraft, a commando, and a victor that can see that grasshopper, but the hovercraft and the commando can't be seen by any other enemy units but the grasshopper. Like, you're concentrating fire and preventing fire from coming back in on yourself. And concentrating fire is always a better option. It's always a great option because you're going to degrade and destroy units faster. Trying to build and forcing your opponents into kill boxes, like that example I just gave, where someone moves into an area and they have so many of your forces that can draw line of sights, but your forces are protected, is a really good thing to strive for. And building those kill boxes and baiting your opponent into them so that you can concentrate fire while simultaneously protecting yourself is a great way to concentrate fire and work to eliminate those targets that you've prioritized. Maximizing shots on target while minimizing your opponent's shots. And this goes to degrading, eliminating units, or eliminating your opponent's ability to shoot by moving in a way and placing your units in a way where they physically can't shoot is always better. If your opponent can dish out 24 points of damage at the start of the game, but you've eliminated 6 through attrition, and then based off of placement, you've eliminated another 4, right? Like 4 shots that physically can't see anything, your opponent went from a potential offensive output of 24 down to 14. And then if you can, on the other end of that, ensure and maximize your damage output, like if you can roll more dice than them, it's just a matter of time before you end up winning the game, right? Or eliminating your opponent. This is a reason why I like indirect fire, because indirect fire gives you flexibility to drop rounds on targets in situations where the unit may otherwise not be able to see, and it allows you, again, to do cleanup duty. When defending against someone who is very good at this or doing this, there's a couple things you want to keep in mind. Using bait units to draw enemy of fire away from what you consider your priority units. So understanding what units in your side are going to score, and potentially strategically throwing units away or throwing bait units out to draw fire off of them, right, is going to help those units survive longer. And what you're trying to do is present your opponent with a target that is juicy, that they perceive as a threat, but that isn't the real threat, right? So you're going to throw a unit out there and be like, hey, shoot at my Atlas while my Drillson sneaks up your side, or my J. Edgar sneaks up your side and scores, right? If you sense that your opponent is trying to bait you with this, try not to take the bait and focus on those priority targets that you've listed in your head. Use cover to conceal your objective grabbers and limit their exposure and the number of shots coming in. So maybe you move your Drillson or your J. Edgar in a way where he can line up a shot on a single unit, right? Where they're stacked and they have a good lane of fire. Maybe they're running tandem and they're shooting at your opponent's J. Edgar, but then only that other J. Edgar can see back. No other units can see them. This is going to minimize their exposure. You're going to especially do this with your faster units that have less health. Give your opponent, sometimes it's really good to give your opponent too many choices to shoot at. And this is why I like to run some of them skirmish mechs that are all kind of the same, and you run them together and it's kind of like, hey, there's a bunch of stuff here. There's no good choices, right? All the choices are right and all the choices are wrong. And if you can threaten objectives with multiple units instead of piecemealing them in, this can force your opponent to feel like they have to spread their fire out and can prevent them from concentrating their fire. Also, moving in a way that pulls your opponent's force. If you can move in a way that where your force can still concentrate fire, but it forces your opponent to pull their force apart and forces them to split their fire, this is going to put you at an advantage because while they're splitting fire, you're able to concentrate fire, right? So instead of you're shooting at 1 or 2 targets and they're shooting at 3 or 4 targets, they're spreading their damage out while you're eliminating units from the game. So keep that in mind as you're moving and as you're shooting. If you concentrate and overwhelm your opponent this way, you will see success, especially when presenting multiple threats and hard decisions, right? I've got this thing that's up close. I got this thing in the middle. I got this thing that's far away. They're all threatening you. Your opponent is going to get flustered and they're going to get overwhelmed, like emotionally overwhelmed, right? In the moment. And then it's going to detract from good decision making because they feel like there's all this pressure on. So use pressure strategically to force them to spread those shots. And then the other thing is don't be afraid to use table talk. I know this might sound a little bit cheesy, but there are ways to strategically discuss what's going on in the battle openly to influence the shooting in the game. You know, and I'm not saying that you should try to force your opponent to make the shots you want because they'll go your way, but there's ways to share information in the game about your unit's current stats that give your opponent something to think about that may lead to them making poor decisions. So maybe you have a unit that's close to dying, you know, and you casually mention that during the game. Hey, you know, I'm moving. You could be like, I'm moving this Atlas. Hey man, I got to move this Atlas back because he's only got 4 hit points left. And really, what you've done is you've told them this thing's almost close to dying. And then they think, well, maybe I need to go after it. Right. And maybe that's what you want them to do. Right. It's basically using, like, I want to say mis or disinformation because you're not lying, but you're using subterfuge to subtly influence the decisions that your opponent is going to make, right? And so think about ways in which you can strategically talk about how the game is going, discuss the battle that may influence your opponent and cause them to make mistakes when prioritizing their own targets. Now, I'm not saying lie. I would never tell you to lie about what's going on, but there are ways to say, you know, this guy does 5 damage, this guy does 3. I'm going to move this guy into short range and threaten this objective. That can get into your opponent's head. If you have other tips or tricks that you use to concentrate fire and degrade your opponent, do you agree or disagree with anything I said, comment below. And otherwise, may the blessings of Blake be upon you.